Let's go. So welcome everybody. Day number 2. Now, I've talked about it and I've been meaning to do my channel intro for a bit. I have a deck up for the presentation. I just haven't had time to record it properly yet. But some of it is that I'm probably going to be streaming more often soon enough, probably next month. But shorter or more contained streams with less going over time, and I might stream once or twice during the week and only once during the weekend. So that will make it even easier for the Europeans with the new gap in daylight savings. There's less of a difference, and if I was to stream before work, then that will be even earlier. So hopefully they'll get more Europeans on the actual stream. Now, so let's get started with this. This is still going to be blackboard heavy, because what I wanted to do with the graph theory part the last time and what I'm going to do today is basically lead into what we are going to be doing tomorrow, which is starting on the Footroll. Now, I believe all the people on the stream know, but maybe people tuning in on the YouTube channel at this point don't know yet, or not all of them do at least. The idea of Cult of Rig is doing seasons that are, for the most part, self-contained, don't require much prior knowledge of the previous season. Obviously, that will change if we go far enough into seasons, and the idea is every season is a different rig. So for season 1, the previous one was just a pilot for me to learn the platform. We are going to do a ball and leg rig, and let me see if my display toggle works. So that spheres look like spheres. Yeah, now I'm squashing the other direction. So we talked about graph theory the last time, and it's going to be the classic ball and leg rigs. Ball and leg rig for ball and legs rig. I can do it for this season. Now, something that we did talk about in the previous season is isolating things by components, which is largely under encapsulation. And I think I did mention the notion of interface first, which is starting something from the boundaries of the problem, from the outward boundaries. So for every component, isolate, figure out the input, figure out the output. We're going to do the same. We're going to extend that a little bit for the notion of the actual graphs. Now, this is not something that I would say, look, it is the way to do it. You should always formally do it that way. This is something that it emerges with practice, but it's something that's probably good to have in the back of your mind when you do something. Isolating a rig in its fundamental parts when you start on it is, it's a pretty obvious thing. I believe most people actually do that. So for something like this, an example, we will definitely have, a body control of some description to move the entire body, and we will probably have a big God node at the base to move the entire rig. And that might be also part of the God node. And this is stuff that we did for the unicycle in the previous season as well. Now, there's an obvious part, which is the leg itself. And that is going to be an interesting component. And that is the reason why I'm doing the Footroll and leg first. Is that especially once you get into evaluating the graph and parallel evaluation and things like that, it becomes pretty important to know how things actually proceed in terms of evaluation and what happens before what else, and if you have circularities. Now, if we break down the leg, there's an interesting part to the leg. Going by interface first means that normally you want to know what your public interface is, which is what the animators will be using. So your control, the controls, or the control layer, or the control interface, whatever it is. You might have an internal guide, and you probably have some settings of sort, some control panel with an interface that's private. So this is a softly private interface, something like the guide, which is what a rig entity, what a rigger will be using to configure the rig itself. And the control is what is public, which is what the animators will have access to. And the settings is something that might not belong in the guide, but might need to change some parameters. It might be non-animatable something. It might configure things, or it might even need to be exposed. Now, hopefully they'll become clear quickly enough. Now, the interesting part about something like that is, and I do suggest that you always have pen and paper, like get yourself notebooks, a lot of them, and always put your stuff on paper first. One of the interesting things about lag, let's say that if you have a control interface, you know that you're going to have IK and FK. That's just the way the animators will want it. Not necessarily. I mean, there's cases for when you have only one of the two, but for our case, let's say that the animators requested both. Now, there's an interesting part, which is the relationship between the leg proper, so this section, and the foot itself. And the main contributor to that is the foot roll. So for the FK part, it's actually pretty trivial. What you will be doing for a leg is likely to be a very simple type of control where you would have something like that. So you would have a couple of joints that you need to control. You would have the femur and tibia, and then you would have the tarsi and metatarsi part of the foot as another two. The relationship between these is pretty much straight inheritance of transform, so it's fairly easy. But when it comes to IK, it gets a little bit more interesting, and there's all kind of stuff that always goes astray when you start introducing foot rolls. So the basic idea of an IK chain is, and let's change color for this one just to have some clarity, is that your IK in the simplest possible way, without looking at soft IK and stretchy and spining and stuff like that yet, is that you would have something like this, and this seems a little bit light, so let's go for something like this. Yeah. In the simplest possible terms, you will want to control the translation of an item at the ankle, have something fixing this, like pinning it at the hip, and you move things around and your leg moves with you. Now, the default Maya tools will pretty much allow you to do that just fine. And the classic way to do it, I don't even know if I should be doing these, but let's go anyway. And the way you will see it most of the time, I don't know if I have a... No, I did not. So the way you will do it, if you use the Maya standard toolset, is you will simply use Maya's IK solver that will get your free joints, because Maya doesn't do bones, so you would have the top of the sorry, the top of the chain, you know, your knee and your ankle. This is all stuff that Maya creates for you, and then you would have a handle, and that's a behavior you have. You have the classic popping, and we'll look at that as well. That's a tangent reaching asymptotes. Now, the interesting bit about the foot roll is that it needs to drive that, but you still want the user to have a control of sorts. Wow, okay, the colors are not doing us any favor. That's probably not going to read terribly well. For now, we'll have to deal with it. So you would have the foot roll down here, and that needs to move the leg as well. So if you have one control here, and then you have a foot roll, and for those that don't know, I'd be surprised if, you know, people following rigging stream didn't know about a foot roll at all, but a foot roll is responsible for that movement of the foot when you peel it off the ground. You know, some people call it the heel back, and the foot roll is forward, where you have that compression going in where the foot settles and then it pivots off the tip like that. And yeah, I think people can see this through the webcam. It was in frame. And that needs to move the ankle effectively. So now you have something here, and that needs to lift up the ankle so that if you're, and I will go to a darker color for these, if your IK chain in rest pose is like this and your foot in rest pose is like that, as you peel off, you know, this will also affect the IK. This is pretty obvious in and of itself. Now, the other thing that you probably want to happen is that you will want this ankle control to also have other items to, once you're off the ground but you're still in IK for whatever reason, to be able to move the foot downwards in an FK-like motion. Now, that is still all pretty trivial, and you know, if you stop at that, the setup itself is usually very easy to do. But the more interesting part is when you actually want that kind of stuff to follow the leg. So, and that is where, when people use constraints, these kind of gets hidden from them. But that is when a lot of circularities ensue, and we'll see it. We'll do it wrong in quotation marks first, and then, you know, we'll correct it several ways. But it's a trickier bit. It's a trickier thing than it seems. So, if you look at the graph for something like that, what is really happening is that this ankle control is the first part in your graph. And let me switch to the chat for a second in case anybody's talking or asking something. As usual, stop me for questions if you have any. So that is our ankle control. Now, that thing needs to inform the position of the IK. So let's say that we just call that the IK. And at this point, you know, it's a super simple graph. Then the IK as an output of sorts. And that will need to have, to drive the foot controls, which are FK-like, and you might want to blend these foot controls between IK and FK. What is interesting about something like that, however, is that if you do just plain connections where as you move the handle, as you pivot the foot, it moves the handle up. When you're outstretched and things are parted away, the foot will basically part from the chain itself. So let's do that as well. Now I'm gonna have to mess with Maya for a little bit, so that's one of the slow parts of the stream. And I normally don't work by joins like that, and I think, yeah, I just appended, didn't I? So so let's say that for now, actually, let's do it the right way. For now, I'm going to implement the simplest possible foot roll, or preparing myself to implement the simplest possible foot roll, where I want to do something like that. And this is going to be a parameter. I'm going to rotate something directly. I want it driven by one control. And there you go. I'll be changing my viewport background for the bright one, but does the black read better? I need to change some of the default colors. They're hardly human friendly at all. They're definitely not streaming friendly. I also think, yeah, no, you can go back. There used to be an interesting bug some time ago where it will cycle between a couple of things and wipe out your custom settings. Now, where was I? So we're gonna get ourselves a control. Simplest possible thing you can imagine. Bad idea using a circle, but this is for the sake of example. And we are gonna say that this is our foot. Let's call it that. I'm just gonna rename the first. And again, simplest possible thing we can do, just a straight up parenting. So this is now our foot control, and our roll is going to be as simple as rotating these. Something you can do is, in this case, you could simply parent the IK handle under these, or you could constrain it. It doesn't really matter all that much. And that is where a lot of this is not okay, stream friendly at all. Black makes non-IK join disappear. Yeah, I really need to change the colors, but it doesn't matter too much, hopefully, right now. I just really need to change the colors for this thing. So this is where a lot of this is what a lot of Footrolls look like. And sure, you know, you'll take care of lining things up, and the setup will be more complex. And this is where your problems start occurring in terms of cycles. And this is why I wanted to do a little bit of graph theory first. So in the simplest possible configuration, like this seems to work. Now, one of the problems with these is that the moment you start going further away than the length of the IK chain itself, is that your foot will part. And I've actually seen rigs, and some of them are also popular rigs, that don't even address this. They basically tell people, you know, don't do it, as in don't pull the foot too far away. Or they introduce some sketchy stretching where this stuff, which is depending on these, will also stretch to reach that item. So hopefully this is all visible. But this is where you basically start encountering your first cycles if you want to solve it properly. Because ideally, what you want to do in this situation is that when this is further than the length of the chain, and you don't always want stretching, and you don't want to impose on the animator by saying, hey, you need to keep it in range or your rig will be broken. I don't find an acceptable limitation. A lot of rigs out there are like that. You want it to respect the length of the chain. Now that's an interesting thing because the length of the chain is provided by here. So if this is your length parameter, and what you want is to limit the ankle by that length parameter, if we are in this super simple configuration that we've just shown. And that is a cycle. Now it's you can make it a benign cycle. You can, you know, work your way through it with constraints, and Maya will basically cluster and break the cycle for you, and it will work. But it will A, cost you performance, and B, make it really hard to actually continue working on that component and add features. So here's an interesting thing about how you can reason about these. Now, if you break these down further, the ankle control can stay. Now, and this is the notion of front-loading some calculations and redundancy and stuff like that. Now, when we'll get into multi-threading, we'll explain why it's not a bad idea performance-wise, but for now, you can just think that it will cost you some performance. So the position of the ankle is just the position of the ankle. Then what you have is also a roll parameter. Now, that roll parameter is responsible to produce this translation. And that translation in relation is the one that we want to affect the IK. So those two together produce an SRT of sort, scale, rotate, translate, or a transform. And that goes into the IK. Now at this point, the IK with its length is the one that's basically providing us with the information to know when to stop the ankle from moving. So before we go into the foot IK, what if you actually front load the length of the IK? So let's say that you have joint 1 length and joint 2 length, and you add those up and you get the length of the chain. So you get something like this. Now, this is the part where at this point you could both limit the ankle as well as configure the IK by the same parameters, and you've kind of worked yourself out of your first problem. Like this gets trickier and it gets worse. There's several steps that need solving in these. But this is the first thing you basically want to solve. So the reason why I introduced graph theory is that I find it pretty healthy. And again, it doesn't mean you have to have the whole rig figured out when you start the component the moment you start in terms of graph and dependencies and stuff like that. Don't get me wrong. But it helps it helps to start right away to try and figure out how your rig will, how your component will read in terms of dependencies. And if these things are properly isolated, you will also save yourself some trouble. Now, an interesting part in this, and I'll look back in that, is that it muddies the waters. If you decided that you wanted this to be a foot component and this to be a leg component, so they're two separate things, now it makes it pretty hard to go, okay, joint 1 and joint 2 lengths and how they go into the ankle, and let's say I'm keeping the ankle in the foot. Makes it tricky to figure out what goes into the foot and what goes into the leg, because you have a part of the foot, this bit here, that is actually parameters that straight up affect the leg. At the very least, these are. So you have, you know, some leg configuration that actually goes into the footroll. That then goes into the leg IK. And that might be, you know, blended with the leg FK. So you can see that if we're trying to figure out the macro level graph, we just made our global rig, if you want, our global graph of the components themselves without looking at the internal mechanics. We separated something basically that needs to be in here. So there's a couple ways you can do this, and this is entirely organizational. The bit that you need to solve computationally or configuration wise is this. This is entirely how you organize your rig and where you offer the controls, so for the public interface. This is something where you have to choose whether you're gonna allow re-entrancy as far as your components go. So you're saying, oh, look, it's you know, I might have something like the controls that when they are just attributes, they can be re-entrant. So I can have something that is on the leg because the animators want to see the footroll on the leg because it's part of the IK, but it will actually go into the foot, and then the foot will also go into the leg. So your macro graph is re-entrant. Maya will let you do those things easily enough if you split things properly. Or your alternative is building a component that's called, you know, leg and foot and put them in. And this is actually what I've done for the longest time for several other reasons, because this problem grows more and more complex. So this is a lot of scribbling for, you know, hardly any rigging at all, but hopefully it makes sense. Okay. If there are any questions, let me know. The stream seems to be about 10-15 seconds delayed. By the way, I was saying get pen and paper. Personally, I prefer pen and paper. Like at work, I have literally stacks of notebooks. But if you ever want to save stuff digitally or whatever, this is Mischief, which I don't even know if it's still produced. It's hardly got any users from what the Foundry guys tell me. But there's a brilliant free and even open source application called Milton Paint. This is what Casey on Handmade Hero uses. So if you want a blackboarding program which is based on the same premises of Mischief, which is infinite canvas, so yeah, it's really good. It's free. It's even open source. Get that. Now, with that out of the way, so what we want to do is start breaking that cycle. And what I'm going to do in the stream tomorrow is actually do this properly. So for today, I just want to illustrate the problem and why we will design things a certain way. For the record, this is not me telling you this is how you do a footroll. This is just me using a way to do a footroll as an example to start showing where graph cycles come into play. So let's say that we use a locator as a control panel or as a settings panel. What you will want to do in there is add yourself a couple of attributes. So, and let's say that we call it femur length d die, and let's say it goes from 0 to 5, whatever, and tibia length. Not great names. I will probably choose better names if I was doing this for real and not in a hurry, but you get the idea. So settings, extra attributes, right, and this is where we pull up the node editor. Do I have? Yes, I do have some shortcuts. So now graph-wise, what we want to do is, and these are going to be all over the place because of joint orients. Yes. Their translate should be fine. So what we want to do, and this was actually very similar to what you would do for the guiding as well, is take the femur length, pipe that into this case it should be the translate. Is that joint 2? Yes. Cool. So there you go. Live guiding in 5 minutes. How amazing is that? And we want to do the tibia length for these. That should still be alright. Now at this point we're using the same configuration for both. So that's good enough. Now the other thing we want to do is you could use some way of limiting Maya as all kind of constraints and stuff you can use. So you could, in theory, and that's another way to solve it for the record, you could block illegal manipulation. So you could make these never go outside of the legal boundaries. Personally, I don't like it, because very often what animators will do is they will over animate something so that they keep that stretch. And they don't want to think about closely keeping something, you know, if you limit the manipulation of that. So let me make something more of a clearer case for it. If you limit the manipulation of it so that no point is ever further away, and I think we put 4 and 5 or 5 and 5, whatever it is. Let's do it. Yeah, 5 and 5. So you could limit that manipulator for the ankle to never be further than 10 units from your hip. But what happens is that you're in IK. So very often people want minimal keyframing, especially for blocking. So if they animated something going from here to here, when they wanted the leg to actually be outstretched, stretched out entirely for that entirety of the swing, then it will be limited here as well. It will be interpolated here to something that is much less than 10. So what you basically just force people to do is they will have to put a lot of keyframes and probably get a lot of pops to get that arc. That completely defeats the point of IK. So you want to allow animators to overstretch and put the control so far outside the boundaries that they can do stuff with minimal keyframes. It's just about half of the point for more of IK once you're in flight, so once you're not touching something. So what can you do with that? That is actually pretty simple, because if you limit from something that's animated far away, so if from this nerve circle we actually had something much smaller, we actually had another object coming out of it, and we use that limited, then we will probably be good. So I should have probably prepared these beforehand. Hopefully it'll be clear. Some noddling is gonna go on here. So this is something that you will want hidden away. But what you could do is take this nerve circle, and for now we're gonna work in word space because it's easier, but we've done enough matrix multiplications and stuff like that hopefully these will not be a challenge. Again, for all of you guys in the chat, please let me know if anything is like if nodes are too small or text is too small. The colors are horrifying. I hope people get the idea of what's going on anyway. That I definitely need to fix. So we do want to take let's actually give them some reasonable names so we know what is going on. is gonna be the hip and the knee and the ankle. I'm not really doing anything with the naming convention right now. Showing up for, hey man, somebody just joined chat. Absolutely zero regard for naming conventions here. And all right, that should do us. You could also limit the IK handle right away, but eventually we'll do, so this will be basically equivalent to the IK handle, but I don't want to mess with it for now. So what we want to do is we want to take the ankle control and figure it out related to the hip. Now we're in word space, so we don't need to do much, which means that if I get the ankle control here, so man, the inverse scale thing always does my head in. For the record, I almost always like keep joint orient flat and call the all of the scale compensation stuff. Now we get hip and ankle control. So if we want this vector for this position, we want to take the hip minus the ankle control minus the hip, I believe. So I'm not used to the factory nodes. What is it? Minus plus average, plus minus average. It never fails to do my head in. Some of the old names that come from when Maya was used for, like these nodes used to work on shaders as well as for the Maya rendering engine, as well as, you know, for your scene graph. So ankle control. This is probably going to be fairly small-ish. We say minus the hip. I would also like you to connect it, please. Thank you. Now that output should actually straight up be... So I want to add it back to the hip, I guess. So if I added it back to the hip, obviously I will get these again, which is fine, because that's what I would want right now. But let's first show what is going on. We don't want the control shape. We want the limited ankle, which I'm not getting. Okay. Sure. What am I doing wrong here? Hidden under the ankle. Oh, thank you. See, that's why I have a chat. As I've never seen that one before. So this should get us, relative to the word, the position of our ankle control. And I should really put something under it so that we can see what is going on. Simple cube will do, we don't need anything more. Hopefully still all making sense up to here. So what is happening here is that I'm considering the local transforms, not the word transforms, because I don't want a million nodes. This is just for the sake of example. It's the execution proper we'll do tomorrow. So this is getting me nothing new, basically. The same position I had before. Now it's just in word space. If I actually added, and I'll be at this point, I will basically be undoing what I was doing before. If I added back the hip, I will be getting my original position. That's what we will do in a moment, but after processing that length. So translate some, sure, just to show that it should be working. Now this should be obvious, hopefully. But what I'm doing here without processing that vector first is really silly, because what I'm doing is taking the hip, subtracting the ankle, adding back the hip. So I'm basically telling it, do nothing, just get the ankle. I'm doing b minus a plus b, sorry, b minus a plus a kind of thing. Now, the interesting part, however, is that we can now produce a limit, which in a way is what the IK handle does. IK itself, the way it's done in a lot of solvers, is it needs to break cycles, and it's actually iterative. I believe, like, even if you use a two-joint chain, I'm tempted to say that Maya will still use a Jacobian, so it would do a fairly expensive integration, but I might be wrong, and they might be optimizing something if you only have two joints. It's something that we should ask Autodesk, so don't take my word on it. Now, what I wanted to get at is that the maximum distance that we want for this ankle to reach is the sum of the length of those two parameters. So there should be a double linear that I can use here. And this is always one of my favorite, the way the nodes are configured. Sometimes you get the ports, sometimes you don't, depending on how the node is laid out. You can edit actually all the layouts for these factory nodes. So if we add that, we should get whatever the length of our chain is. And then what we want to do, so another thing I might need, vector product. I don't even know why I clicked that, but whatever. So this one has operations. Is it this one? Yeah. You can do no operation and normalize. And we've done these when we're talking about maths. So what happens is this ankle control right now is whatever length it is. It's unbound. It's free to be as long as it wants to be. If I normalize it, that's going to limit its length. It's going to squash it, so its length is 1. Its position is still going to be correct. Sorry, its direction is still going to be correct, but its magnitude is going to be capped at 1. Now, that is not without problems, and we'll look at that. But for the time being, if we take this, and the output when you have, it should be a single output when you have normalized on still yet. And that is what we add back to the hip. There you go. Now what is happening here is that our control here is basically always normalized to be 1. So it's literally, it's kind of a direction constraint-ish in a way, I guess, just offset. If it's proper normalization, it won't be capped at 1, it will be 1. Yes. It makes I shouldn't be saying capped in this case. Yes, what we want is actually to cap it, but we'll get to that, because what is going to happen here is that we can now multiply that, and I don't think there's a vector by scalar, so let's just use plus minus average gain. So if we take that, and you know, this normally will take like 5 minutes, but as you make the, not mistakes, but as you build it up, it takes considerably longer. So we want to, why am I using plus minus average? I'm an idiot. What I want is a multiply divide should work, I think. Multiply divide does points, right? Yes. So what we want to do here is take what we had before, which is the length of our chain, and multiply our vector of length 1 and use that instead. Now halfway there. So what has happened here is that now that is as long as our chain can be, but no longer. The problem is that it's also no shorter. So what we actually want to do, instead of a straight up multiply divide, is basically have the length of this vector, and there should be the distance between nodes should be able to get us that. And what we want to use is not always 10, but whatever is smaller between 10 and the actual length of those two. There's a few ways you can do it. The easiest will probably be to add a few additional objects, and feel free to do it that way as you experiment. Add a few additional objects and track that, but what you're doing is basically emulating the operations that we're running here. So chat, I am gonna be trusting you for the feedback part. Is this actually clear? Is what is going on clear up to here? So this is our setup as it stands. And what we have obtained so far is a limited encode that is always exactly 10 units, or rather the length of our 2 bones away from the heap. Now, so we have our boundary, but we want a boundary that is only used when this exceeds the length. So a couple ways you can do it. You could use a conditional, where you go, if whatever this distance is greater than the length, then use that. But a clamp is basically the operation that we want. So input min and max. Now, the maximum for a clamp, this distance we know we want it to be no more than whatever that is. So we know that this is a valid number. Yep, all clear so far. Now what we're interested in for the minimum distance is probably some reasonable limit. This will help in another way as well, which is if the animator put the rig in a position like this will be an overcompression that the geometry just can't handle. So this, for free, I guess, gets you a lower bound as well. And let's say that something like that, which looks to be probably about 3 units, is what we want. I've actually ended up doing a lot more rigging than I thought. I thought I would have done more theory, but sorry, this needs to be the max. Could I notice? Otherwise I would have been wondering for 5 hours what was going on. And let's say that the minimum is 3 in this case. And what we want out of that is this multiply divide. Right now we are I can do it. We're always using 10. What we want to get is the distance between these two and multiply and get its length. So I remember I was using something else at some point. Probably Ryan, as usual, pointed out, there's for vector length you have the distance between node loss. So this is normally tied to a manipulator, a Maya manipulator, a handle that will show you something in screen. If you click a couple things and go get distance between, but you can also use the node row, and it's basically the length of a vector that comes from the subtraction of 2 things. All right, bit of a mouthful. So point 1 and point 2 should be upstream and should be the encode control and the heap. So we want point 1, and the order wouldn't matter for these. So now, if I use this straight away into the, if I use this straight away into our multiply here, what would actually happen is that we're back to square one, because this is getting the distance between these two objects, and we are getting the vector that is like, we're getting the direction, we're basically getting this direction, normalizing it, and then if we multiply it again by the distance between these two, we re-obtain that. But the difference here is that at this point we can actually clamp. So if we put this in and we want to, yeah, input is fine. Sorry, just thinking for a moment. Yeah, clamp might not be great here. That's whatever. For now, let's keep it. I don't want to muddle the explanation too much. We actually only need one of the three values, don't we? Yeah, because we're using it for a single. So distance between is getting us a single value, the add double linear is getting us a single value, we're only using R, and we are going to replace that. So what's happened here now is that we have the desired effect. So if it gets closer than 3 units, this is going to be normalized and then multiplied by a minimum of 3 and staying there. If we exceed the length of the chain, sorry for that, let me drink for a sec. All right, audio still right? Does it sound the same as before? Yeah, monitor is fine. Okay, so with that limited, now we could straight up just do something with the IK handle, to be honest. My stream is buffering like mad, forgot my question notes. Yeah, if you have questions, do ask them, because I can still answer them through the stream, and you'll catch the answers in the YouTube video. So everybody's saying all good. Now that we have a limited ankle, what we want to do is drive this IK handle here by that limited ankle. In fact, we could simply do that for the time being. As I say, we could just straight up drive the IK handle. And reset that away. Now, at this point, what we have done is we have fixed the IK basically, the way we want it. And we have done it. And this seems like it sorted no effect. And yes, it didn't sort no visual effect. But what we have done is basically set things up so that they're not cyclic. Now we can limit things for, you know, something like this foot to use based on some maths that are absolutely not related to the IK chain. Now I'm using the hip here, which is possibly kind of dangerous, so let's also fix that. Because that is part of the IK chain and it might cause us grief. So old school, I know there's a match transform and stuff like that now in Maya, finally. So this is gonna be the head of the leg. Sure. Not really the name I would normally give it. Definitely don't take this as a... Alright, this is one shortcut we don't like. I gotta find out why, because sometimes parenting will stop working until you parent something and then it'll work again for a little bit. So, we will want to replace these hip connections with something coming from the leg buffer. Do I want it yet? No, not yet. Probably actually do. So don't care about these. Thinking about it, because if we're gonna establish the next step, this is gonna be needed, so we will have to. So these are the connections we want to replace, which is input 1 here. This is the messiest graph ever, isn't it? Oh, okay, that's interesting. Because that is not oriented. Ah, no, it is. Moment of panic there. I thought I had some wonky joint orienter. What can I do actually? This is why I don't like to work with joints and minus IK and stuff like that. Worth saving. We're probably not gonna keep it, but sure. Might not be a bad idea. Thank you. Mostly, like, the stream is gonna be over fairly soon, but mostly in case something happens in literally the next minute, and I'll put it in a proper place some other time. Anyway, so what we want to do now is limit these, and this is what we want to affect the IK ankle. So we have broken our Footroll right now. These will not do anything. We might still get a cycle warning when we do it. We'll deal with it. I am doing something super wonky somewhere. Am I not? By introducing the leg buffer. Oh, I didn't reset the rotation, did I? Let's leave that for another time. Okay. Back to it. So what we want is now to get that buffer line, this in its zero space. We have the ankle control, foot tip, foot ankle. Oh, we're not doing too bad actually. So if we have the, I didn't realize I actually set myself up for these to work. See, this is apparently not working yet again. So there you go. So now our foot is properly limited, and other than us using the hip, which we shouldn't, we should use a buffer that is shared by both the hip and this object. Other than using the hip, it has no ties to the IK. And the IK computation, which, you know, obviously needs to do a lot more than just figuring out a distance, has not kicked in yet. So you can do all of the work you need to block the Footroll where it needs to happen with just a bunch of graphs. This is still not what we want for the final setup, but I'm actually pretty happy that we got this done within the hour. Now, the next thing we need to do, let's see if this cycles, it shouldn't just yet, is if we put the IK handle under the foot ankle, we should now have a working Footroll. Whoa, not that. There you go. So the leg is now working. It's properly limited. The Footroll is limited by the same parameters of everything else, which is good. And it can affect the IK without circularities. Now, this still has a lot of issues. Let me explain why. So let's say, and this is what we're actually gonna, for the most part, solve tomorrow. No, not that. So let's say that this is the default and it is as far, you know, maybe whatever it is, as far as we want the leg to bend or whatever. Or maybe we want to, let's ignore that. So maybe we want the leg to stretch out like that. Because we have limited the Footroll before this happens, without circularities, what is going to happen is that in this case, the animator wants to stretch the leg, they got what they wanted, but if the same animator has any Footroll on that foot and does that, what you get is the leg is still going to be bound by that Footroll when it comes to compression, and that is because we're doing the limiting of these. We're doing the limiting of these at the same time that we're doing the limiting of the leg, if that makes any sense. So that is the next thing we're going to solve, and that is the next cycle that we need to break. Because what is happening is that we have done what we said we will do here, but what we have created that way is that we do have the ankle and we do have a limit, and this is good. We broke cycles, we don't have any issues with that. It's pretty easy to sort out the interface, but we are now in this situation. So this is Footroll FR, and what we actually do want is and sure, the foot roll will actually affect the IK because it will offset the IK. So don't get me wrong, this is not entirely correct. Let's actually do it correctly. So we limit the foot roll, and by limiting the foot roll, we actually get the IK. So the foot roll always affects the IK in ways that we don't want. Now, the trick to solve that, and is what we're going to do tomorrow, is that if you treat the foot roll as just an offset, so if all you get out of that foot roll, and this is the same front loading we've talked before, literally, when you think about it, in this case, we have a single joint, even easier. If all we want to get out of the foot roll is the offset of that IK handle, as you roll, as you do that, then we don't really need to get this all set up, like so injected into the whole thing. All we want to do is find these offset, find however much the foot roll rotation offset the foot from the ankle. Then we add that back in with whatever position of the ankle and everything, so that we find the roll position of the ankle, and then we limit that. So that makes for more front loading, and basically means that what we actually want and what we will get, and this is what we're going to do tomorrow, if you think of this as a dependency graph, is that from the ankle you can get a foot roll, which is just an offset, and that gives you your real ankle. So what we did is we blindly, super scratchy throat today, we blindly took the control itself, but what we want is the control plus the effect that the foot roll had. Then we limit, and then we go into the IK. So that's what we're gonna do tomorrow. And what I wanted to do today was a little bit more than this in terms of the graph and the interface. I'm still fairly satisfied. Man, it's like 1 hour on the dot again. Does it all make sense? Hopefully it does. I guess we started rigging a little bit sooner than I expected, but it is Cult of Rig after all, not Cult of Graph. And most importantly, any questions? Because in such an anticlimactic way, I'm going to segue out of it, because I think this is a good place to actually stop. Look, mommy, we got a foot roll. And I might actually, I'm probably not going to share this scene because this is so sketchy, but I'm definitely going to share the scene that's going to be at the end of at the end of tomorrow. So would you need to account for all parameters that affect the ankle separately? Possibly, yes. It depends. It's the idea. So I guess it's a good question, but I'm not entirely sure what you mean. Foot pivots, cockle, okay. Yes and no. So when you think about it, like foot pivots, cockle, and all of that stuff, it all goes into the foot. You're not really. So it is a good question. So the foot roll is, I'm calling it a foot roll, but what we're really doing is a foot control. Right now, when people talk about a foot roll, what they're talking about is IK that from the foot drives the ankle. So that's one of the biggest mistakes I see, which is confusing the foot roll with the foot itself when it really isn't. And the same goes for like foot pivots, cockle, and so on. Like when you think about it, it produces two things. 99% of the work done by those is you will have all kind of stuff going on in here for something like this item. So we're in Q&A time officially, I guess, for your foot. And literally all it does is, you know, it might pivot off the sides. It might pivot off the tip. It might pivot off the back. You'll do a heel back and all of that. All of those things do is move the ankle. Then sure, you almost assuredly, unless you're rigging something that has, you know, very rigid foot, which can happen with some animals, you will have something in here that you need to join. So you know your foot will, well, it's not super comfy with the hand, but you get the idea. Your foot will do that, and I'll get some footage for that. we'll do that. So you want to bend these in and then do the rest. But again, what you're really doing, if you extend the problem a little bit, is you want to figure out the offset for the ankle. So seen from the side. All you need from a Footroll, and this is true for all axes, and one of the reasons I wanted to do the Footroll first is that all of this stuff will get us into rotations and rotation orders and Euler and all of that stuff, is this offset. And then if you have an ankle control, all you care about on top of that offset is the bend that goes from the ankle to this foot and the bend that goes from this part of the foot to the next. Because once you do that, once you think truly in terms of decoupled IK and FK, your Footroll just drives your IK and gets you a couple parameters, such as these two things. Your FK will do the same to give you the two angles for the leg, and now you just achieved equivalency for the foot offsets when the animator wants to grab something here and manipulate from the ankle down like that. Do you use a custom IK system, and we'll be showing us that as well. We will implement IK, which is the stupidest thing you can think of. It's really easy, actually, for 2-bone chains at least. Yes, so there's statement follow-up to the question, which is, so you can sum the effect of all the parameters and treat them as a single offset. Yes, that is what I'm trying to get to. Now, and I'm sorry, I don't want to belabor the point, and it's always a concern that, you know, we might be confusing things by getting too specific about something or whatever, but this works for a number of situations. I decided to do the ball and legs and start from the Footroll because it's one of the most common and at the same time a relatively tricky dependency to break in what is a relatively, it's considered a plain feature that almost all rigs have, but I very rarely see it done right. And when it comes to parallel evaluation, we'll get to that, when it comes to the actual graph evaluation and all of that, it's a cycle you really want to break, and it's not that hard to break it, but as is typically the case with parallelism and re-engineering things so that they work with parallelism, most of the time you need to figure out the problem in a slightly different way than people are used to, rather than, you know, try and cram your old solution into a parallel word computation where they just does not want to deal with it. So it's important to think of something like this as cause and effect, and how much do you need. So here's one thing we will do. All of these, like we've moved it around with the ankle and all of that, but when you really think about it, we don't care for that. What we will eventually do is the Footroll will stay hidden at the center of the work, because literally all we want to get out of it is an offset and a couple of angles. That's it. And when you do things like that, it's also a lot easier to convert these things into manipulators and handles and all of that. But so, and someone else was asking, not sure if it's too off topic. No, it's not, don't worry. You mentioned not normally using the default Maya nodes. Do you have any specific dig nodes you recommend implementing? I will go over that. I will go over my list at some point. I'll probably implement a few as we need them. So the way this season is gonna work is and it's gonna be a struggle. I mean, everybody sees how much I struggle with the default Maya stuff. I'm gonna do everything, well, not everything, like a reasonable amount of stuff with this rig without using any custom tools, any custom nodes. Show what the performance is like, because a huge part of doing a good control rig, if you consider it axiomatic that it needs to be stable and intuitive and all of that, a huge part of it is that it needs to be fast. And for it to be fast, you need to know what costs you and what not. You need to know how to profile it. So we're gonna go through this exercise, like probably most of the rig, if not all of the rig, without using custom anything. We'll see what the performance is. I'll explain what the bottlenecks might or might not be, because there's a lot of myths going around, like, oh, this is bad in Maya, that is bad, you should never use it. And say, some of those are not quite true, as I was saying, for constraints, yes, they're bad factory wise, like when they come in because they're circular, but you can actually break that dependency. And once we're done with that, part of it will be, hey, this is the nodes that I recommend you write, if you can write them yourself, or we'll see what we can do to actually get those nodes into the community. I'm sure there's quite a few people that follow the stream that are plenty competent to write those, and I'm sure some of them will share a library. So is all of this clear? Is the point I was trying to get across, I guess, is that I wanted to do more of the control part, but all of this was in the context of figuring out how you can break a graph, break cycles, figure out what is a pre-flight that will get you out of a cycle. Part of this has a lot to do with animation controls. So where the animator wants the controls when you have an interface will greatly affect whether you can go, hey, you know what, I'm gonna do a component that's called foot and leg, and the parameters are gonna be a bit mixed up. If your animators are willing to deal with it, depending on how you lay out your interfaces, where you work at, or where you study at, or whatever, that will determine whether you can do it or not. If you cannot, then you will have to be, you might have to be a little bit inventive about where you put the controls and how you split, and you might do hidden components without an interface that generate parameters and do a little bit of trickery. Anyway, I'm digressing at that point. But that's why I wanted to do more stuff like this stream about controls, but I kind of got lost in these because I thought having the practical example would have been good. All right. Stream should be catching up to my silence. So I'm going to give it another, minute or so. If you guys have any questions, I'll be happy to answer. Otherwise, it's another stream closed in time. We're doing well. Most importantly, was this interesting? Do people even care about rationalizing and formalizing rig components? Because I don't know how much blackboarding and noodling of the simplest possible things people are willing to take before it gets boring. All right, so far so good. There's a good sample of people that come from different places and different walks in life that don't think it's horrible, so we'll keep it. All right, I'm gonna call it. I need caffeine so very badly. Yeah, more so than structured is great, and I think last season was largely so. Sorry, there was a statement in chat which is hammering home the idea that any rig component, no matter how small, should be well structured, will be good for teams. I think structure is what unknowingly, I mean, it's probably the natural thing to start with. Structure is largely what the pilot season was about. And sure, we did a little bit, of exploring Maya, because you can't just do, hey, here's 20 hours of rigging standards. But it was probably largely the idea of formalizing the structure and all of that. But more so than structure, I think, and some people definitely get it, and some people have not been exposed to it, is the idea that rigging isn't anything super special. There's some very simple maths and computer science that don't takes a lot of effort to learn that will allow you to rationalize what you do. So, and I guess that's what we will try to get across this season. All right. Seems to have been well received. I'll call it a win. And I'm gonna stop the YouTube recording. So thanks everybody for watching this. And If you're on the stream, I will see you tomorrow.